Thanks for joining. I hope everybody's off to a good start for our sessions here this morning. I'm really excited to share my presentation here. One PreStage to rule them all, secure macOS deployment with Power Automate. If you were hoping for tons of Lord of the Rings references here, I'm sorry, I did not fill that. So if you just came for that, the nerds should leave the room first. Just kidding, stay. This is very interesting. I hope this is something that you find interesting and take and do something cool with. So real quick, in case anybody here is interested in the slides to kind of follow along with, go ahead and scan the QR code. Just so you don't have to take pictures of the slides or wait, till afterwards. I feel like that's kind of helpful to have some of the code examples in there. Or you can go to go.unl.edu/PSUMac2025. So I'll leave that up there for just a moment while you capture that. All right, cool. Well, my name is Quinn Harouff. I'm from the University of Nebraska system. I'm a platform security engineer in our ITS department. The University of Nebraska system covers all the campuses in Nebraska within that system, so Kearney, Omaha, Lincoln. I've been in an IT role with the University of Nebraska in some capacity for over 10 years or so, and have done Apple device management in some capacity for about 8 of those years. So I enjoy speaking at conferences like this. I've done a couple in the past, one at JNUC when it was all online, and then 2 years ago I did a session here over the macOS security compliance project and our implementation of that at the University of Nebraska. So those are some things to go back and look at if you're interested, but today's something a little bit different and something I'm excited to share. A little bit about what the University of Nebraska looks like. We've got 3 main campuses, UNK, UNO, and you're maybe most familiar with the Big Ten school, UNL, University of Nebraska-Lincoln, the Cornhuskers. ITS is a central or Office of the President organization. So a number of years ago, we consolidated into one unit, and we kind of cover in terms of IT support across all the campuses and a lot of the extension centers across the state as well. And we have a location in rural Nebraska and Curtis as well. But across all of that, we have over 300 staff, about 42 distributed IT teams that focus on workstation support in some capacity. So focusing on like end users and device deployments and things like that. And we partner with UNMC, our Meta Center, and the state colleges for some IT services, but not on an Apple front necessarily, just something to kind of note. When we're talking about endpoint management in our environment, we have kind of a hybrid service delivery here. So a lot of our components from an endpoint support focus are kind of managed by our workstation support associates. So we've split these up and put a lot of time, and by we I mean my team in security engineering, have put a lot of time into the procedure documentation and training that goes into how a device should be set up and standardizing those things kind of all together. And then we give kind of access based off of that in our management tools. So we have like inventory manager and endpoint administrator. They're responsible for a number of end user support actions. And then the security engineering team kind of focuses more on the endpoint baseline is what we call it. So really the infrastructure, our Apple School Manager and Jamf environments, our security controls, baseline applications, like productivity applications and security applications, are all managed there. We do the access management for those systems, ensuring that folks should have access to the proper areas of those management tools, and also we serve as like a tier 3 of support as well. So when something goes wrong, when somebody needs assistance, we are helping with some of that. Our Apple environment, around 5,300 Macs, 453 tvOS, and 3,300 iOS and iPadOS devices. This is a little bit of a sprawl, but 81 Jamf sites. We're kind of working on consolidating those as different teams kind of consolidate across the university as well. But like I said, there are 42 different support units, and we have those sites in place to either because of some historical reason, and we're just kind of working on consolidating them, or because they have separate access levels for individual areas of support in those individual workstation support groups. In our environment, that means we have 280 Jamf Pro admins. There are too many cooks, so to speak, in some capacity. But they're using those tools to deploy devices and scope things into PreStage enrollments and deploy policies as needed. And we have varying amounts of expertise. And unfortunately, 164 PreStage enrollments on our computer side. That is sprawl over time for different configurations. Something needs to change about that to kind of support that endpoint baseline that we talked about and kind of bring parity across our system. This is kind of what that looks like. You have a range of expertise in our environment. So, for example, we give access to both Apple School Manager and Jamf Pro. So you have a lot of folks who maybe are experts in their field. They're typically part of like your fine and performing arts areas and our School of Journalism, folks that have a large Mac fleet and are regularly interacting with Mac devices, down to folks that maybe support one device in their area. But nevertheless, they do need to support that device, no matter their expertise level. And you have a range of frustration among those individuals. We provide a lot of training, but if you don't touch a Mac once every 6 months, that leads to just decreased levels of, you're not remembering, all of the deployment mechanisms there. So, the goal is to simplify that. In our Apple School and Manager environment, we do set a default assignment to the majority of our devices, so that we can capture things as they come in from like authorized resellers or Apple automatically, and then folks typically in the past have just reassigned those devices in Apple School Manager, hence the need to have access into the system. But occasionally you get a confused technician, maybe doesn't touch a lot of Apple devices, come in, and they switch things up on you. That is to say, we start getting tickets in about, why are my devices going to the libraries? Or it causes some confusion when folks aren't familiar with the system. That's just one example of some challenges that we have in our environment. The other challenges, as I mentioned, the varied configurations across those support areas. So we have, that 160-some number of PreStage enrollments. Usually we have used those in the past for different setup configurations. Folks need, a specific set of software, a specific setup for a lab or something like that. Across all of those sites, it's really turned into a lot of sprawl in all of those areas. And so when we're supporting those technicians that may have an issue with their deployment, especially ones that haven't, deployed a Mac in a couple of months or maybe aren't as tech savvy in the Mac space, it leads to a lot of time spent on our part as that escalation point to try and untangle the mess of what policies and configuration profiles and and any other deployment items that are going out, and why are they going out, and what smart groups are they a part of. And we want to simplify. And then that baseline deployment has been a piece of this. We want to make sure that out of box, all devices are getting our security controls that we deploy to all devices. They're getting our security software and all the productivity software that the folks need to get started, right away. And we want to simplify that process for the technician. We also do a standardized naming scheme. So we do like a prefix value in our naming. We develop a standard that ties to all the departments in our organization, and we try and standardize on that. Not everybody follows that. It's a manual process in some capacity to make sure that everybody is doing the same thing. And I mentioned our security risk level assignment. Not everybody's applying those. That security risk level goes into kind of our network posturing. So if you don't have that risk level set, you're not getting elevated access on our network to certain network resources. So all important things that we want to make sure are happening on the fly as we're deploying devices. So the process I'm going to share today, we have some core objectives here. We want to improve that support process on our end with kind of a single point of failure. We want to offer zero-touch deployment. With setting things to a general pre-stage, that creates some complexities in how do we get devices to the area of Jamf that the technicians are supporting that user in? And how do we achieve some sort of automation there so that things can come directly from the vendor to the end user if that's an option that technician wants to take part in. So we want to enable that process. We want to use vendor-supported tools wherever possible to get the highest level of support on those. Whatever, name your flavor of setup utility that offers kind of the status of what you're installing on the machine out of box. We want to kind of narrow that down. We have different folks using different things. So finding the best option for us there is a goal. And then bringing automations back on the table. Doing things like risk classification assignment, device naming, and the site assignment of a device automatically, so we can kind of take some of those manual steps out of the process when we're deploying Macs. So what we're using for this, first and foremost, Jamf Setup Manager. I'll talk a little bit about that as our deployment tool. Giving the status of what is happening, initiating certain actions, kind of showing what that workflow looks like. We're using Power Automate as the tool here to perform some of these automation actions. And then we are a Jamf Pro school. We've been with Jamf Pro for 11 years or so. So it's worked well for us. It's kind of historically what we've been with for a long time now. Something to point out is the processes I'm going to share here are not tied to these specific tools. You can take this concept and you can apply it to whatever setup tool you want to use, whatever automation platform you may already have access to, and your MDM of choice. These were what I had access to and what I built with, and maybe what I was familiar with. So take that into consideration. There have been sessions that Mac admins and Jamf or JNUC in the past that have talked about a similar style of workflows that use other tools to accomplish this style of automation. So this is kind of my version of that. Real quick, if you're not familiar with Jamf Setup Manager, I'll just kind of do a quick plug here. I'm not going to do much of a deep dive into it, but there's lots of documentation out there. A great tool. It appears over your setup assistant. You deploy it through your pre-stage enrollment along with a configuration profile, and you're able to kick things off right away during your enrollment process. I think this is my favorite thing that Jamf has released in a long time. I really enjoy kind of being able to inject this into the setup process before the user is even created on the machine in Setup Assistant, all over Setup Assistant, or on top of it. It launches over on top of. So let's jump into what this setup workflow looks like. So traditionally, the process I was talking about earlier, something comes from our authorized reseller and lands in Apple School Manager, and then our workstation of support associates, all 260 of them, may be responsible for interacting with any one of these steps here. That is Apple School Manager, the PreStage enrollment, and Jamf Setup Manager, or whatever configuration tool we're using. There's lots of points for failure, and there's lots of manual interaction that has to happen, and that's quite a bit of a time sink across all our deployments. So simplifying that to where we can offer that zero-touch deployment model as an option, while also offering the single-touch deployment option. Maybe a technician wants to use that white glove approach to set up a device and deliver to an end user. That's an option too in this workflow. But we want to enable new horizons here. So this is just kind of a quick look at what this looks like. We have Setup Assistant. You launch the Mac. You go through your MDM enrollment process. You're all familiar with that. After you've initiated that enrollment, fairly quickly after that package installs through the PreStage, you're getting macOS Setup Manager or Jamf Setup Manager thrown over the top of your window here. And from here, we're able to initiate specific actions. So this is a kind of a look at what that P list looks like for Setup Manager, just a chunk of it. We're given a few things to customize it in here. It's a very customizable application, but the thing I like is we can initiate a Jamf policy from this space with a custom flag. So we have a set computer name policy here that we're initiating through this configuration, and Jamf Setup Manager takes care of that. And the best part is it does it when it knows that Jamf is ready to kick this off. So it kind of waits for a minute and allows the device to get into a state where it's ready to actually initiate these Jamf command line options. So what that looks like is for our set computer name process, we launch a Swift dialog box over the top. This is just a custom script that we built for this particular process. Folks are able to enter their campus, their organizational unit, and their department, which leads to the device name shown on screen that follows our device naming standard that we've set. By some association with those individual prefixes, because each prefix will associate to a specific area, we'll assign it to a specific site. So that flow allows us to land it in an area of support all through this one PreStage, kind of from here. And so I'll show you after this what that kind of the background of this looks like when we set our do our set computer name process. Another thing we do, we're using a very similar process for. I won't highlight this one as much, but same concept. We're kicking off that set risk classification option, and then we're setting that here with that Swift dialog box to set a low, medium, or high value at this screen. Traditionally, that's been something that's left to technicians to do in our Jamf Pro environment through an extension attribute, kind of after the device is set up. That leads to some changes in configuration when you're waiting for the device to receive configuration profiles and scripts as that affect like the login window. The change in behavior there is maybe undesired. So this allows us to capture this change and apply those configuration profiles from the macOS Security Compliance Project immediately out of box. We're not waiting until the device is set up to apply those. And then once those are done, Jamf Setup Manager takes care of the rest. We have an array of baseline applications. This isn't an exhaustive list, but when it's done, it does a countdown and you hit continue, and then it takes you right into the create a computer account screen. We have a similar process for shared devices that just launches into a Jamf Connect screen currently. It's a very simple process. We encrypt the device, of course. And then it's ready to go to a user. So, where we kind of maybe interject there, the single touch workflow is kind of within that setup user account. I've actually taken a device, closed it for 24 hours, and then opened it back up at that create user screen and was able to create an account still and just kind of continue with the setup process. So if somebody wants to take that white glove approach to deliver a device to a user and set up with them, they can get everything set up and then have the user create an account at that setup assistant screen, which allows them to get secure token, and then you don't have to mess with that mess. So to cover our API workflow here, what are we doing in the background? How are we achieving that that goal of setting those, allowing the device to set its own settings in Jamf, allowing it to make its own settings to Jamf? Our big goal here is to avoid exposing API credentials, right? We've seen lots of scripts out there that you take your API username and password and throw it in the script parameter. There's a number of reasons why that's a bad idea, right? That is all data that you can scrape from the machine, and it's for a long time now been a bad practice to do that, because you can take those credentials if you're a bad actor or a curious student and go affect other machines and go read data on other machines or your Jamf record, whatever that API token has access to. Assume that, or whoever has access to the API token, assume they have access to your entire Jamf environment. So what we're doing is using Power Automate as an intermediary in this process so that we're not exposing those credentials directly to the endpoint. And then we're kind of anchoring our trust in that communication within MDM, and I'll show you how we're achieving that as well. So that we're relying on an existing secure channel of communication for our API workflow. And again, we only want the device to modify information about itself. So again, going back to our set computer name policy that we kicked off, at this screen, as soon as you hit OK, this kicks off the rest of the process, and I'll show you what that looks like. So in our setup manager file, that's the file that controls what Jamf Setup Manager is doing, we're also delivering the Jamf Management ID. That's that long token, that unique identifier in Jamf Pro that you can use to identify a specific device in your environment. So we're giving the device its own setup manager value through that configuration profile and a Jamf variable. And then we're also passing in through that script that we have to set the computer name a Power Automate URL that's unique to the flow that we're actually initiating in Jamf Pro, or in Power Automate. And then our request to retrieve a token is initiated. So the device itself is going to initiate a process in that script to say, send me a token to perform other actions in this workflow. So this is just a little piece of the script that we use and kind of a highlight of how we're doing that. So we're giving it that workflow URL. This is the Power Automate flow URL that's generated when you make this flow. We're, again, taking that management ID that's passed in through that preferences file in that configuration profile. And then very simply, we're just initiating a API call, a curl command to that URL in Power Automate. And we're giving it the action init for like initiate. And we're giving it the management ID saying, who am I? So what do I want to do and who am I? Power Automate is taking that request it's generating a unique key for this specific device and an expiration timestamp that we can use to kind of expire that unique key in a specific set of amount of time. And then it does a quick API call to Jamf Pro to do two things: update a Jamf Pro extension attribute in the inventory record with that data, and also initiate an MDM settings command so we can actually send information directly to the device with that unique key. So a little more specifically, what are we doing? In Power Automate, we've got our request received. So that's kind of what this looks like. You generate a JSON schema with specific attributes that you're looking to retrieve. And then we can do things with that data that's passed in. So it generates the unique URL. We're setting this to anyone. There are some other settings that can actually kind of narrow down to users in your org. That's not the type of flow we want here. We want this available to all of our Macs to initiate, and it's a post command. That JSON looks a little bit like this. There's lots of options that we'll use later for other processes and other kind of actions that we want to perform. But right now, we're just concerned about the action item, init, that I mentioned, and also the management ID that we mentioned. So this is what that, kind of next in the step, we always just, based off of the management ID that was supplied in this flow, we're taking that inventory record from Jamf for that device and just returning it to Power Automate so we can use that data to do some comparisons. And at this point, that data is never leaving Power Automate. It's all staying contained within our flow. But Power Automate holds the token to access Jamf API calls, not the endpoint at this point. We then take into account we step into an action. So this is like a switch statement basically, and we're saying based on the action that was supplied, that init command that we mentioned, if that action equals init, we are going through this process, and then there's like another one for update that I'll show you in a moment. But this is the flow that we're using when that token is requested from the device. So first, we're generating a random token. For that, we're just initiating a child flow. This is something you can do in a Power Automate solution, which will allow you to kind of break apart in more of an object-oriented programming way certain actions in your flow. So generate random token is something that I maybe want to use somewhere else. So I've created a separate flow that I can just pass in data to, and then it returns a specific value. Additionally, we're getting a token expiration. So I mentioned that we want an expiration date and time for that token that we generate. So we're just generating a string there to check against. And in this case, that's 10 minutes. So next, we're doing an update to the Jamf inventory record with specifically the token and timestamp that we generated in a little JSON string. So we're just kind of taking that value as it was requested and placing it in the Jamf inventory record almost as just a database for this. So we don't have to store this data elsewhere. It can be stored in Jamf Pro to check on later. And that allows us to validate that data here in a future step. Then we're also doing the MDM action. This is kind of my favorite part that I found. I didn't know you could do this. So some processes that I've seen kind of use this same workflow have actually created a configuration profile for every device to deploy out like that unique token in this step. I don't like that process. I think when you have 5,000 devices, 5,000 configuration profiles for that process, get a little fuzzy. I also just haven't had the best luck in deploying things through configuration profiles, specifically tokens, when they're constantly changing, right? So if we're putting an extension attribute in that, we could potentially send that to the endpoint through a configuration profile, but updating that gets a little fuzzy sometimes. I really like this method because it just initiates a settings command to the endpoint instead. So a little bit about this. This is located in the API v2 MDM/commands API endpoint in Jamf Pro. So you can go take a look at kind of what this does. This is kind of the same thing that Jamf uses to initiate like turning Bluetooth on and off, for example. It's very similar. We're doing a command type of setting, so there's several different command options that are listed in the API reference. Settings is the one we're using here. And then we're just creating a plist file. So we're giving it our plist, and we're just saying API and random token. That's the random token we generated in our API workflow. And then our identifier is just a unique value. That's where it's going to land in our managed preferences file. And then we supplied our management ID there so that Jamf, in our Jamf API call, it knows to go to this device, specifically the management ID value of the device that supplied the request. And then finally, we really don't say much back to the machine. So we originally, from the device that initiated the script, did a curl command. That device is going to maybe expect some sort of response. We could send back some data from this point, but we don't want to do that. We don't want to just give anybody who has that URL and a management ID access back to that data. We just want to say, yeah, it worked. Cool. And in this workflow, we just kind of always say that. Unless it failed at an earlier point, we don't tell it much other than, thanks, cool. But what we are doing is we're using Jamf Pro and that MDM command and sending that requested token to the device using the power of MDM. And that is kind of, like I mentioned, sitting on that secure channel of communication that Apple has developed between our MDM tools and our endpoints. That token lands in that managed preferences folder under the unique identifier that we created or specified. So edu.nebraska.setupmanager is the one that we specified there. You don't want this to conflict with something else because it will overwrite that file potentially or conflict with an existing file. And it does that via MDM. And so we watch for that path in the script. So we initiated the call. It returned status good, and then it kind of waits. So you may be familiar, sometimes MDM commands sit for a minute. So we're just kind of waiting on a loop. Usually within about 15 seconds, that kicks off. Sometimes it's immediate. Sometimes you can run into issues. I think this is where you might see something just kind of wait and wait and wait if there's some issue, maybe a buildup of commands in your environment or something. But in my experience and from folks that have provided feedback, usually this process is immediate. And so we've got that token locally on the device now through that local file, and that device can use that token to initiate additional actions in Power Automate. This is just a quick look at what that plist file looks like in the Managed Preferences folder. It's just in a dictionary in a plist file under the key API, and we get that string that we generated. So now Power Automate is going to, or the script is going to call Power Automate again. As we did before with that init command, we're going to do it once more and with kind of a different action this time. So here's that same set computer name script, but a different portion of it. We have that same API URL that we originally had. We've got our managed preferences file for setup manager that we're going to reference. And then we have our config file, and then we're going to pull out that API token that we gave it. And then we're going to use those values in another curl command. Oops. Yeah, I'll walk through these. So, oh goodness. There it is. So that same JSON kind of schema that we used earlier to do the init command, we're now going to use some of those other options. That is, we're going to use the action, but the action this time is not init, it's update. We're also going to supply a secondary action. That is to specifically call the update, set site action in our flow. We're going to give it the management ID, and then the token that we retrieved from that process. And then whatever device or whatever site name and site ID were selected through our process of setting the device name will be added into that payload as well, site ID. And then we initiate that same command. So this is a familiar screen from earlier. That same flow retrieves the request, or receives the request from the device again. And we pull some data from Jamf Pro about that device. And then we go through a different route. So instead of init, we're doing the update action. It falls into this space because that is the value we provided in action. And so now we're going to actually parse some of that data out of the Jamf API that we just called about the device. And we're going to take the token and timestamp that come out of the Jamf API in our extension attribute. So when we assigned those values to the extension attribute earlier, now we're going to take those from here to actually do some comparisons with. And then we're going to validate the auth. So this is just a quick conditional statement that we're doing some validation in. We're checking that the token supplied in this call for the update action is equal to the token that exists in Jamf Pro for the management ID that was also supplied in that action. So that way we can kind of compare and say, okay, if those are equal, then we can actually initiate this process. If not, we're going to do something else. So additionally, we're going to take a step here to check that timestamp value. So if we're outside of that threshold for getting the for the timestamp, it's going to fail as well. So we have 10 minutes to do it after the token has initiated and or was originally created for it to actually perform some action. So the fail will return a status code of 403 and just kind of fail out the process, and then we handle that in the script accordingly by either trying again or displaying an error message to the user, which can, contact your support, or there's an alternative method to handling this. But if it succeeds, if that token was matching and the timestamp is good, we go to our secondary action. Secondary action was what we supplied in that original command as well. The update action had a secondary action of set site. So we're choosing that because that was the workflow we're doing. We also have one for set risk level. So we can kind of do some different actions based in the same flow based off of what was supplied there. And then, so we validated, it's all good to go. We can perform the action that the device is requesting. So here, we're setting the site that was supplied with the values supplied by the device. And we're returning a success with an expiration to say, hey, if you want to do something else, here's how much time you have to do it. So we succeeded in modifying that Jamf site from its originally enrolled site from UN General, which is where our automated device enrollment workflow, kind of everything flows into that automatically. We have a PreStage that's auto-assigned. and then it goes through this process, and then it lands in the UN ITS site in this example. That is all happening as soon as you hit OK. That long process is in a couple of seconds, and it returns, and then it continues on to the next action in Jamf Setup Manager. And then it's worth noting, by the end of this process, one of the options we have here is to initiate other flags. So if you have an additional apps flag on your last policy item in this workflow, you can actually have a technician in their respective site say, any device with this device name, give Creative Cloud 2, for example. We always deploy Creative Cloud to this set of users or this sub area, so we can create a smart group and base it off device name and leave it in that Jamf site, so it only affects the users within that kind of that area of support, while also kind of leaving options to use that or not. So some folks want that, some folks just want to use the baseline. Some of the security measures we took here. So we succeeded in no API credentials on the device. We only have that unique URL that's generated in the workflow. The tokens that we're giving to the device are short-lived. They last 10 minutes in this example. We can variabilize that, we can change that, but those tokens are sent through a secure connection with our MDM that is anchored in trust between the computer and Jamf Pro from our MDM protocol. Power Automate takes care of the validation of those tokens between the device and the value that we created and stored in Jamf Pro, and only allows those actions if that token matches. And that Power Automate URL is something we rotate regularly, so we can go in and change that URL. So if somebody were to scrape that from the script and play with it, they're only going to be able to do something with their own device that has the management ID on that device, because they have to have access to that device to retrieve that token through MDM. And that will fail as we rotate that. So kind of future goals that I want to achieve with this process. We have some options to expand these workflows to technicians in varied support teams. So we can potentially say the technician logged in during the enrollment process when prompted, when the device first set up. We take that value of the user that authenticated there from the Jamf inventory record, and we compare it to what groups that user is associated with in through a Power Automate workflow that checks with Entra ID to say, is the user part of this technician group? And then it places that, or it gives that user or that technician the ability to do something a little bit different. I'd also really like to see us auto-assign some of these variables. So ideally, technicians aren't doing any of that. They're not, end users, when they're doing that zero-touch workflow, they're not setting their device name. That's actually a feedback item we got is well, my users can't do this. Well, I do disagree a little bit. I think folks are smart enough to pick their department where they work, but I understand. Sometimes somebody picks the wrong thing and they say, oh shoot, and it lands in someone else's area of support. My thought is if we can take those attributes of the user that logged in and auto-assign or auto-offer them a specific prefix to use, that could kind of be a good in-between to achieve some sort of automation of their risk level and their device name. And then, enhancing the logging of this process. So Power Automate does a good job of kind of listing out all the failures of what's going on. This happened the other day. I saw a ton of failures happening in the authentication or in the device name workflow, and kind of dug into it. Found the management ID that was being used, looked into Jamf Pro to see it was submitting a device name of null. That was just a problem with the script that we had. And we were able to fix that without even really getting a report from the person or the technician that was running that workflow, but just noticing that the failures were happening. So more of that is desired and is really a great part of this process. And then, just further reducing that manual intervention that we have to have, between my team and the technicians in such a wide variety of areas. And also between the technician and the end user, and they can focus on other responsibilities, and so can my team on other security responsibilities. So we did the zero-touch deployment. We enabled that at scale. We can use that across our environment, but we can give the options to do that white glove approach. We did a secure Power Automate plus MDM workflow here, and then we streamlined that support with some faster issue resolution. And that is kind of all I have right now. So I would love if you take out your phone and scan the session feedback screen there. And I'm going to try and do this session again at JNUC this year. And so if you have any feedback for me or want to learn more, that is a great way to reach out. My email is up there if you want to kind of talk more about this process or kind of get, pick my brain outside of this space. I'm here all week, obviously. And then presentation slides, if you missed those, you can grab those there. But great time to open up to questions if anybody has any. Yeah? Sure, yeah, sorry.
How do you manage the Power Automate account or service account or durability of that?
Yeah, we do kind of two things. We store everything, because those Power Automate workflows, and again, the question, if you didn't hear it, was how do you manage the flow? Where do you place that? We don't want to place that under a user, because if the user goes away, the flow goes away. So we actually place that under a Power Automate kind of management account that has a license for Power Automate and is the owner of those workflows. And then we also share from that with kind of our team those flows to individual users who are supporting those workflows. So it can be accessed through that account if needed, but otherwise we have access to editing those workflows from our accounts additionally with Power Automate licenses. Any other questions?
What's a tool other than Power Automate that someone might use in a similar way?
Yeah, I'm curious from you. The question is, what's a tool, another tool aside from Power Automate that somebody might use for this type of workflow? Something like Zapier, I think does this sort of thing. Maybe if this, then that. Those are a little bit more consumer focused potentially. I'm not super familiar with things outside of Power Automate. This is kind of my first stab at, or one of a few first stabs at building some automations. I'd been doing some other things, and I thought, well, let's try this. So I'm curious if anybody else has any tools that they use for this type of workflow.
We use Workato. We have very similar workflows.
What is it called? Workato? Yeah.
It's like Power Automate.
Cool. Yeah, I will say, we use Team Dynamics for our ticketing system, and that has a tool called iPass that would handle a flow like this as well. But that's kind of early in its adoption, so it's not something we've placed in that space, but it certainly could handle something like this.
For your lab computers, do you have this is the problem I run into is each iMac is named individually, but based on that lab, it's like -AL1 through whatever. Is your process?
Yeah, so the question is for lab machines, when you're naming things with a scheme of, device name, device Mac1 or something like that, how do we handle that process? Today, so we don't use this main workflow for our shared devices. That is one thing where it's similar, but it is actually, you go in and you switch it to a different MDM or location in Apple School Manager, and then go down that kind of similar but separate workflow for shared devices. Right now, it is manually set, but some ideas, are we could offer a spreadsheet in that process, in that script, to say, here are my device names and here are my serial numbers. That's one thing that I've thought about, because that exactly, how do we get that even in like rapid redeployment settings where we have like checkout machines and we have a reset process that redeploys those. How do we get that device name to apply to those? It would be like having some sort of external data source for that information. The cool thing with Power Automate is like one option would be to have an Excel spreadsheet that your workstation support staff have access to, and you could add them to that spreadsheet that the Power Automate flow would be able to pull from. That would be one option there to kind of inject into there. But one cool thing that somebody, there was a session last year, I forget what it was called, but it was a very interesting session that kind of sparked this for me in Power Automate. They said this doesn't have to just authenticate into your Jamf API. It can authenticate into other things. So for example, it can kind of enable the device to get a device name from through that Power Automate workflow and still go through that token exchange to allow that information to come down. So. Any other questions?
You said the token expires in like 10 minutes. Is it only used for initial setup and that's it?
The token, in this particular process, it's only used for like we can take that token and we can initiate the process for setting the computer name, and then we in that script check to see if there's a valid token again, and initiate that in our set risk level script, or that part of the script, so that we're using that same token if it's still valid within that amount of time to set that same thing, and we don't have to go through the process of exchanging that token again through MDM. So that's where we set it for that amount of time to offer other options in that workflow, particularly in this case, the set risk level. Now, if a user was to set the name and then continue and then sit on the set risk level screen for several minutes, it would expire. And so it accounts for that and checks the token again and initiates a new token exchange if it's been long enough in that setup process. Good question. Any final questions?
On the Jamf Setup Manager side, are you guys having a wait command while that script is running in the background?
Yeah, so when that script runs, it inherently kind of waits at that point. So it has kicked off that policy, and so the script is running through that policy. It's not going to continue on to the next step until that process is completed. So all of this is happening in a single script on that kind of one entry, that line for when we initiated that policy. So it inherently does wait for that to finish. Additionally, like the third item in is updating the inventory. So we're not setting the computer name through, we could go through Power Automate and set the computer name through there, but we're just doing an inventory update at that point, which allows on kind of the third action, it allows that information to come back, and then we have a device name in Jamf by the time the workflow is finished for those additional setup options. Anyone else? All right. Well, thank you for coming. I'll leave this up here for a moment, but feel free to provide feedback, reach out. Like I said, I'm happy to talk more. I know this is more conceptual, but maybe there's room in the future to build something that's importable. There are options in Power Automate for stuff like that. So I'm new to it, so I haven't been able to get that far in the process, but I would love to share more in the future. So thank you all for coming. I really appreciate it.